All right, guys, welcome back to our teaching in the book of Ruth. Now, the last time we were here, we left off at the end of chapter 2 when Ruth, after a hard day's work, had returned home to her mother in law, Naomi, and showed her the large amount of wheat that she had threshed for today, which ended up being about a bushel, which was a very sizable amount, and especially for a woman. But nevertheless, so she came home and told Naomi how she was doing, how her day went, and that she had met Boaz and all the things that Boaz had done and said. Remember, especially about the doing part, but all the things that Boaz had done and said to her with respect to asking Ruth to remain with his maidservants for the duration of the harvest, as well as his generosity towards her, and no doubt the good things that he said about Ruth, about hearing about her loyalty to her mother-in-law. So she informed Naomi of all of these things, and we saw the response of Naomi in gratitude. We saw thankfulness, gratitude, and that how she was glad that Ruth had found how that Ruth had found Boaz's field and servants. And this again speaks of what we were talking about earlier, God's providential hand, how that God was involved in all of these situations that were taking place unbeknownst to the women at that time. But nevertheless, she was thankful, giving gratitude about Ruth finding Boaz, and also how God in his kindness had not forgotten about them. So she advised Ruth to remain with Boaz and his maidservants for the duration of the barley harvest. And so we see at the end of chapter 2, the idea in the narrative is Ruth would continue to act as she did earlier. That is, getting up early in the morning and going out with the servants of Boaz all day long and returning home. And thus, too, no doubt we can see there's a sense of prosperity and provision for the women, because notice, what do we see? We saw bountifulness in the generosity, in the expressed generosity of Boaz to Ruth. Remember how much he gave her, and remember how he commanded his servants to give her of their own harvest, even cut down some things to make it easier for Ruth to gather. Thus, this would make Ruth's gathering in more abundance, in greater abundance. So we see the provision of Ruth. So God provided for Ruth and Naomi during the time of the barley harvest. So we see that too. So we see this continuation in the narrative of Ruth getting up early in the morning, working all day, and then returning back home to Naomi. This faithful activity of work for Ruth. All right, so now we are in chapter 3 as we prepare. Now remember, as we ended chapter 2, it was the end of the wheat and the barley harvest season. Remember, we talked about that in chapter 2 too, how one would follow after the other. I don't know, I've forgotten which one actually comes first, but I think it's the barley harvest, and then comes the wheat harvest, and then it would be the end of those seasons following consecutively one after the other. But the point is, now that this time for the harvesting, you get it, you cut the crop down, and then afterwards you would begin to thresh it. But the season or the time for the harvest, cutting it down, preparing it to be threshed, this season of harvest has now come to an end. So the reason why I am emphasizing that, I tell you what, let me just go into verse number 1 of chapter 3. Now we're going to talk about the Lord bless all of chapter 3, because I think it's necessary to bring it all together to keep the full picture in mind, and also to kind of deal with the theme that the Lord is setting forward for us. And even if you'll let me say it in the title that I've given to you guys, and how to catch a man, we'll talk about all of that. But let me just simply go into verse number 1 and you'll understand what I'm trying to say right here. Okay, so let's do that. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you?" Okay, now, I could go further in reading the rest of this particular section, but let me just deal with this verse alone so that you can understand what the point that I was trying to make earlier. Okay, remember, the barley harvest, the wheat and the barley harvest is now over with. Ruth was one of the gleaners with the maidservants of Boaz. And so she would, you remember, the whole point of the gleaner, follow after the reapers during the time of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. But now that that's over with, it's over with, what else is it for Ruth to do? So in the mind of Naomi, older, smarter, and wiser. And this is also the picture that is given for Naomi, that God has given that picture of her too. But in her mind, she is thinking about the continuing care that both of them need, because as long as the time of the harvest was going on, there was work for Ruth to do. But now that the harvest season is over with, the question now becomes, well, what shall we do? And also, too, we can see a sense of selflessness in Naomi, because notice, it doesn't show that Naomi was so much concerned for herself. Ruth had already demonstrated that what she was doing and the work that she was doing was not only for Ruth, but also to take care of Naomi. So I guess, therefore, you can see implicit in her statement is her trust for Ruth, that you don't only take care of you, you also have taken care of me. And this has been clearly demonstrated in the text. But anyway, but the point is continuing care, continuing care. Now that the barley harvest is over with, what can Ruth do? What will Ruth now turn to? Remember, Naomi is old, unable to work. Ruth is the only one able to work. But what can she do now in order for the both of them to survive? We need to continue to live, okay? With that understanding, now let's get into that particular text. So she says, "My daughter," and notice that you can see, you can feel the care and the empathy. "Shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you?" And this becomes the theme of chapter 3. The counsel of Naomi to seek ongoing security. Notice what I said, guys. Ongoing security. The harvest is out now over. What else can we do to take care of ourselves? We still got to eat, still got to take care of ourselves. Everything that comes with life's expenses. So, seeking security for you so that it might be well with you. And so this becomes the very theme of what's going on in chapter 3, as well as the reasoning behind the counsel that old wise Naomi will give Ruth, even as we said earlier, how to catch a man. Because what Naomi is going to do is counsel Ruth to seek Boaz as a means of security. And when we say security that we're talking about, that is for the provision of life. Now, let me say this because it's fresh in my mind as we go through this particular narrative. And I'm going to try not to make too many comments, but there are so many philosophical thoughts, ideas, and spiritual points that you can bring up along the way. Here, it is clear that we are talking about providing for her. And we'll say today, in today's vernaculum, financially. And as the scripture is speaking, and even as it pertained to that day, remember we talked about all of this in the introduction, as well as in chapter 1 about widow women and how they become impoverished if their husband has not left a sizable estate for them, and if they had no sons who could work and provide for them, the impoverished state that they would find themselves in, and even the very thought of a kinsman-redeemer. We've talked about all of that in chapter 2. But the point that I'm trying to make here, there is no negative connotation given here with the mindset of Naomi as she speaks to Ruth in capturing or finding a man who will take care of her. Do you understand that? So there is no negative sentiment that is actually being placed here or that is underlining. In other words, this is how we do it today. Finding a man who will take care of you. And we look at that a lot of times, especially in the modern day women, in a sense of arrogance. I don't need no man to take care of me. Okay, fine. I'm not so much as worried about that, if that's the mindset that you want to take. But dealing with it from a pure scriptural exegetical point of view, nothing wrong with that. And also, too, as we move even now in the sentiment that is being pushed even now, there is nothing wrong with a woman in setting forth qualifications. Notice, setting forth qualification in her desire for a mate, a husband, to be thinking that the man needs to be able to take care of me, to take care of our family. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. And there is no negative connotation in that idea in the scripture. This is the whole point of it all. Ruth needs to find a husband that will take care of her, and also, too, implicitly, he will also take care of Naomi, her old mother-in-law. So the point that I'm trying to stress here, guys, without going too far into this conversation, is because oftentimes when we look at scripture, we want to look at it through the lens of our society today, of Western society today, and we miss out on looking at or understanding, interpreting the scripture through the lens of that society at that time, the customs and the traditions of that day, what was considered to be good or bad or normative. What is the normal thing to do at that time? And so we try to judge scripture. We try to judge people's behavior through what we deem fit to do or something unfit to do. Okay, so be careful of trying to apply any negative judgment to Naomi or to Ruth in seeking out a man to take care of her. Don't do it from Western eyes, from our perspective. Do it from the biblical perspective. It was common sense. It was the way things were done at that time, and it shows the wisdom of Naomi, and also too the wisdom of Ruth, because she listened, as you'll find out, to the advice and counsel of her mother-in-law. So interpret the passage according to the context of biblical history. Okay, but anyway, so verse number 1 took a long time for that, but I think the rest of it will go a little bit quicker, smoother. We need to know how to do it. But so the theme is now set in verse number 1. Naomi is going to counsel Ruth because in her mind, she wants to provide for her daughter-in-law for the future. Verse 2, now is not Boaz our kinsman, with whose maids you were? Behold, he winnows barley at the threshing floor tonight. So remember, we understand. Remember, we talk about the time. Let's look at the time again. The barley harvest, the wheat harvest is now over with. Once they have harvested the crops from the field, then begins the second phase, which is the threshing of the wheat and the barley. That is when you beat it and you kind of cast it into the wind so that the kernels of wheat or barley will fall to the ground, okay? And this would be often done summer months at night when the wind is high. That makes it real easy for, as they thresh and beat it and cast it into the air, the wind causes the chaff to blow away and allows the kernel to fall to the ground basically in one place. All right. And so this is the activity that Boaz and his servants would be doing after the season of harvest. All right. And so Naomi draws Ruth's attention once again to Boaz. So it shows that her mindset was thinking that the protection or the provision. Remember we talked about one of the meanings for Gaal, which means kinsman or redeemer, Kinsman-Redeemer. Remember, one of the whole issues was responsibility and protection. Remember that? What was the function? Let me remind you so you can kind of hold on to it. In the event that a man should die and this man should fall on hard times, lose his property, and even in the case of Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, that this man should die, his nearest relative, the sense would have the responsibility of reacquiring that man's property. And also, too, remember we talked about that in Deuteronomy. If the man dies, a man dies, and has no son, leaves no male heir, then also the brother that is next to that man would have the responsibility of marrying his widow to bring up a child in his name. So these concepts are coming into picture. And so all of this, by virtue of Boaz being the nearest kinsman, who will also not only reacquire the lost property of Ruth's husband, therefore her son's husband, because remember, her sons would have, if they had not died, inherited the property of her husband, and also Ruth having no children. The whole point, Boaz could marry her, and how were we introduced to Boaz at the beginning of chapter 2? A mighty man of wealth. He was able to provide for Ruth. So in the back of her mind, she is thinking what? Our nearest kinsman, who is Boaz, is a wealthy man. And guess what, Ruth? You can marry him and he can provide for you. Okay. And so this is her mindset. And again, let me bring this point out too. And I don't want to make a big deal out of it, but just I want you to think about this too. I want you to think about this too now. With respect to everything that we have said thus far, and even once we complete this chapter and also complete chapter 4, there is an absence of a particular idea or thought, and that is beauty. Nowhere in the scripture, in the text of scripture, does the Bible talk about the beauty of Ruth in this sense of being pleasant to look upon. You know what I'm trying to say? Good looking and all of that, as we'll say it now. There is no emphasis placed there, say it that way, at all on Ruth's beauty. And even as we work through in chapter 3, we're going to also see no emphasis at all, even from the mouth of Boaz himself. Boaz, no beauty, no handsomeness. So we can see these people acting in wisdom, and that is the wisdom of choosing a proper mate, the wisdom in choosing a husband or a wife. And what we will see, and I know I'm a little premature, but nevertheless, right here, what we can see by Naomi, the wisdom for a woman in choosing a husband. Let me say it like this, and I think it'll drive the point home even better. The wisdom in choosing a husband for yourself ain't all about how good he looks. It's not how he looks in a pair of Levi's. It's not about all of that. It's about the wisdom with respect to the man's integrity. A good man is a godly man and not any man. And that's why I also said how to find a good man, how to catch a good man. So the wisdom will be not so much in what the man looks like, but the integrity and the overall character of a man. And then again, even with respect to Ruth, what is it in Proverbs 31 and 30 when it says, beauty is fleeting? I like that. In a sense of vanity, the beauty of, because it's talking about a woman. What do you mean vanity? And what do you mean fleeting? I don't care how pretty she might be now, especially when women are young, middle-aged, stuff like that, blah, 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 and tweet, tweet, tweet. I don't care. Regardless, that beauty will fade. It fades over time, and she ain't as pretty as she once was. She may not be as sexy as she once was, but what does it continue to say? But the woman who fears God, talking about her characteristics, her integrity. And this is what we've been talking about with respect to Ruth. All of those beautiful characteristics and integrity that the scripture has developed for us concerning Ruth. So the point that I'm making here, it was an aside point, but nevertheless, it was a major point in the absence of talking about anybody's physical characteristics. No discussion whatsoever, because what is truly important in trying to determine, trying to choose a good husband for you? It's not his appearance, but even here, notice, ladies, his integrity and his ability to provide. That's what's important from the perspective of a woman. And even as we've talked about earlier, and one of my YouTube viewers said, so I'm going to say this for you. You know who you are. What's important for a man is not how pretty the woman is, but the integrity of the woman. Is the woman a godly woman? Because she can be ever so beautiful and you hate to live with her. Again, what did Solomon say? It's better to be on the rooftop, to live on top of your house, than to deal with an antagonistic woman. That is, to be quarreling and arguing with a woman bitter and hard to live with. You'd rather live on the top of the roof by yourself. But anyway, enough of that. Now let's go back to the text and its exegesis. So she says, what? Time for the barley harvest season is over with. The time for the threshing has now come. And so therefore you can find Boaz at the threshing floor. And he is a kinsman-redeemer. And so let me show you how to catch a man. Let me show you what you need to do in order to catch Boaz. 3, wash yourself, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Let's continue so I won't be so long. It shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go and uncover his feet and lie down. Then he will tell you what you shall do. So she said to her, that is Ruth to Naomi, all that you say, I will do. Now let's discuss this section. So she's already said that the target is Boaz. This is what you do. Put on your best clothes. Wash yourself. Get yourself fixed up. So it's kind of like common sense in the ladies. You want to catch a man, you kind of want to look your best. But anyway, wash yourself, anoint yourself. And you see where it says best clothes? The word best is not in the Hebrew text at all. The reason why the translators put it there is because they know they're trying to show you the understanding of the counsel of Naomi. Naomi is indeed counseling Ruth to look her best and get yourself ready and put on some nice clothes and put some perfume on. That's what we'll say it today. And then what? And go down to the threshing floor. Go down to where he is, but do it in a subtle way. Don't get his attention. Don't get anybody's attention. Don't let him know that you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. And I like that too. Again, we see the wisdom of Naomi on display. What? She's counseling her, go down there with the intent that you're going to make your move on Boaz, but only make your move after he finishes eating and drinking. And why after eating and drinking? Because once he does that, he'll be in a more compliant mood. He'll be happier and more subject to going along with it. In other words, he's eating, he feels good, he's in a good mood, and he's restful. So whatever Ruth wants to say or do at that particular time, he'll be more apt to go along with it. So you see how wise Ruth is. And not only in that wisdom, we see her being calculative. And guys, let me tell you something. Women are calculative. But let's continue. And so what? So when he lies down after eating, I'm in verse number 4, Naomi tells her, now you note where he lies down, where he going to take a rest after eating and drinking, after threshing for a while. And then I want you to go and lie at his feet, uncover his feet and lie there. Now, let's talk about that. What is she saying for Ruth to do? And is it, I want you to understand this too, is this act of laying at his feet, is this some type of a custom for the Hebrew women? First, let me answer the question on whether or not it is customary. The answer is no. It was not customary for a woman to come to a man in this way, to lay at his feet. All right. Now, let's talk about other things in the laying of his feet. Is it a euphemism for sexual activity? And the answer is absolutely not. She is not telling Ruth to engage in any sexual act or to try to encourage Boaz to attempt some type of sexual act. So this is by no means, listen to me, no means a sexual gesture at all right? But what it is a bold move. Why? Because as it was not customary for a woman to do this, for Ruth, that is, once Boaz is laid down and cover himself, and you can imagine how a person is asleep in whatever direction, however they're sleeping, and she goes and to his feet. Remember, this is also too, I want to see this too now. At the feet is an act of humility, all right? So as she goes to the feet, uncovers his feet, and lays down, and therefore in the uncovering his feet and her laying down, this will become implicit that Ruth is making a request. Laying at his feet, covering herself with the cover that Boaz was covered with. You got to follow all of that. Laying at his feet, covering herself with the covering that he was covered, that he covered himself with. She is therefore making a request to Boaz. But the point is, she is counseling her to make a bold move of a request for Ruth to ask Boaz to marry her. That is, exercise his role as a kinsman-redeemer. And remember, we've already talked about what that means. The kinsman-redeemer reacquired the property of the dead kinsman or the kinsman that lost property, as well as reacquire the wife from the kinsman that died, right? So she is requesting that Boaz should do this if Ruth should follow her counsel. And clearly it says that Ruth says, okay, that sounds a good thing for me to do. But anyway, so, okay, we've talked about the uncovering of the feet. But notice too now, at the end of verse number 4, Naomi says, then he will tell you what you shall do. I like that. That is one smart woman. Notice, she understands that when Ruth makes this bold gesture, unusual, uncommon, and I mean in your face, but at the same time now, not is devoid. There is no sexual content at all involved, but it is a powerful gesture of saying, marry me. marry me and take me as your own. She understands that when you do this, listen, he will tell you what you shall do. In other words, he's going to respond to you right then and there. What do I mean by that? He's going to tell you whether or not he's willing to marry you or whether or not he rejects what you are offering. In other words, you're going to know right then if he says, fine, I'll take you for my wife. And you'll also know at the same time, too, if he says, what? That's okay. I was just being nice or whatever was going on, but I don't want you as a wife. You are going to find out right then. That's a smart old woman. And so, verse 5, so Ruth said to her, all that you say, I will do. This builds even for the picture that God has already given us about the compliant nature of Ruth, the humbleness of Ruth, and even we see in the humble gesture of Ruth that what? She is going to lay at this man's feet. And may I say again for my beautiful YouTube watchers, ladies, that humble gesture, highlighting her characteristics once again. Humility as well as integrity. And we're going to see that even again about Ruth's integrity. Remember, too, one of the very themes that I am placing forth, even exegetical from the scripture, how to catch a good man. Why did I say that? Even why am I pausing? Remember what the scripture has already told us in chapter 2 about Boaz. Boaz, man of wealth. Boaz was a godly man. Remember how he greeted his servants, how his servants returned a greeting. May the Lord bless you. You bless one of the Lord. How Boaz, integrity and his righteousness with respect to how he treated Ruth. In other words, Boaz is a good man. So what am I trying to emphasize again? We see here overall how to catch a good man. And again, what? Let's talk about what how Ruth is trying to catch him, how she's trying to catch him. What? Not trying to sell herself. She didn't try to catch him with per se beauty. You know, when the moment came, she did get herself together and she put on her pretty clothes. Yeah, that was a part of it. But overall, what is the primary emphasis concerning Ruth? Righteous, a woman of integrity, an humble woman, a good woman, a godly woman. How do you catch a man? By being a godly woman. This is the most important thing of all. Okay, but let me go back to the text. So verse number 6, she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law had commanded. When Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, and she came secretly and uncovered his feet and lay down. It happened in the middle of the night that the man was startled and bent forward, and behold, a woman was lying at his feet. And he said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your maid. So spread your covering over your maid, for you are a close relative." Let me stop there. Oh, I like that part. So what happened? So verse number 6, she did everything that her mother-in-law instructed her to do. So she went to the threshing floor where Boaz, and you got to understand implicit, you're going to see this more so too at the end of the chapter. His servants were also there. Boaz was not the only man there, okay? But he is the chief person in this narrative right now. So she went there and she waited until Boaz had eaten, and notice his heart was merry. That goes back to what we were saying, the wisdom of Naomi. He's going to be relaxed. He's going to be in a good mood. And so you wait and then you attack. But anyway, so she waited until then, and he lied down at the end of the heap of grain that he had threshed out. And so Ruth came in very quietly, in a demure sense, and she uncovered his feet and laid down according to the instructions of her mother-in-law. And so quite naturally, you can imagine a person asleep at night. And you know how we do when we sleep. Very few people, I doubt it, sleep in just one simple direction all night. And we move around while we're sleeping. And sometimes we awake, whether fully, partially, or whatever. You know how it is when we sleep. So Boaz is there sleeping and probably tosses a little bit or maybe turns to the side. And you can imagine his feet all of a sudden, it touches something and it feels like a person. And he's like, whoa. What the world is going on here? So Boaz, he's startled, awakened out of his sleep in the middle of the night, and he gets up and says, and he looks, and he says, all of a sudden, there's a woman lying down at his feet, and so quite naturally, he's like, who are you? Who are you? That's verse number 9. And so she answers. Now here, guys, pay attention. Can I say it again? Ladies, look at the response of Ruth. She says, I am Ruth, your maid. Now, why did I say ladies again and take a careful note? Okay, it's the Hebrew language that's so important. Now, I know I don't go through a lot of the Hebrew text here. Well, possibly most of us, I can read the text, but a lot of people probably can't read the Hebrew text. But anyway, what I'm saying is the Hebrew text is important, but sometimes it's not really important in the narrative as it is translated. The translation can be good enough, but here the original Hebrew word is very important here because what? In all of my babbling, what am I trying to say? When she said, I am Ruth, your maid, the word that she uses for maid, and sometimes people say maid servant, the word that she uses is amateka, which is for maid. But all right, let me just tell you, the word that she uses here is amateka, which is your servant. But there is a difference because notice back in verse number 2. Let me take you back to verse number 13. Again, where we have maid servant, the word is used shifchateka. So what's the difference between shifchateka and amateka? Notice shifchateka in chapter 2 when Ruth refers even to herself, your maid servant. But there's a difference in amateka. Going back to chapter 3, I almost lost my place. When she uses the term amateka. Amateka is a more servile reference to herself. Do you understand what I mean when I say a servant? It gives a sense of servant, being a greater servant. Actually, and I'm trying to go gentle with you ladies because I understand your sensibilities. But if you take offense at the scripture, you won't see the beauty of what God is trying to tell you. The sense of the word is almost like a slave. So notice the gentleness by her choice of the word amateka in the difference that she used for the word servant earlier. She is trying to, you can see a sense of self-deprecation, which highlights the characteristic of her humility. And also, too, you can see it shows her disposition as she prepares for the request. Do you understand that? The way that she is presenting herself in the request that she is about to make to Boaz. So the overall sense of what I'm trying to show is her humility in this request. But now watch this. I like this too. I might go into the Hebrew of this. This is so beautiful. And it almost has a sense of a poetic sense. And what do I mean by poetic sense? Let me prepare you for this. A poetic sense in the sense, what was the counsel of Naomi? Go when he is asleep. Remove the cover that he has placed on himself. Take that off of his feet and cover yourself, Ruth, with the cover that he covered himself with. You got it? Lay at his feet. Take that cover off his feet. Lay at his feet and now cover yourself with that covering. Remember that? That was the counsel. And that is what Ruth did here. And so we see in the text, notice, It was when she did that later on in the middle of the night, he woke up startled, found out it was Ruth, and she said, what? So spread your covering over your maid, for you are a close relative. Okay, I changed my mind. I'm not going to worry about going into the Hebrew grammar. I think the translation is good enough within itself, and you can see the poetic nature of it even in the English translation. She covered herself with his covering, and so now she tells him, or she requests of him, to cover her. Now, I am asking you, Boaz, cover me. Why? You are my next relative. You are a close relative. You are a redeemer. You are a redeemer. And remember everything that we said about a redeemer, having the right and responsibility to marry, to reacquire the property of the dead or poor relative, and also to marry the widow. And thus, this is involved in everything that she is saying to him. And she is saying, will you take on this role and responsibility? In other words, she is literally asking him to marry her in a very bold move. So she is saying, I uncovered your feet so that you would cover me. And this all goes back to what Naomi said. Shall I not seek security for you? And she is asking Boaz, by means of performing the role of the kinsman-redeemer, to become her security, to become her husband. 10. Then he said, I like this. You have to be able to read it in the Hebrew really just to enjoy it. So I'll try to bring out some of the intensification and the tone of the text as I read it in the English. Then he said, "Ooh." May you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. You have shown your last kindness to be better than the first by not going after young men, whether poor or rich. Now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you whatever you ask. That's it. That's it. For all my people in the city know that you are a woman of excellence. Okay, so now let's talk about that. So after hearing what Ruth has said, in the whole sense of being the kinsman-redeemer, really asking him to marry her, he responds with a blessing. Notice, may you be blessed of the Lord. So you can clearly see he is excited, he is happy, and he is appreciative of her offer for him that he should marry her. And notice how he couches that sense. You have shown your last kindness to be better than the first. What does he mean by the last kindness and the first kindness? Well, what he's talking about, remember that it was in the beginning, chapter 2, that Ruth, we know that this was providential of the Lord, but Ruth had come into the field of Boaz, and was gleaning with the maids of Boaz. And then we understand that Boaz had invited her to remain with his maidservants, and Ruth did just that. She remained with the maidservants of Boaz for the duration of the barley and the wheat harvest time. Okay, this is the first kindness. She stuck with him, and he was saying, I appreciate you sticking with me like that. The last kindness is what's taking place right now, in that you are asking me to perform the role of the kinsman-redeemer. You are asking me to marry you. And that's why he said, your last kindness is even better than the first. This, what you are doing now, ooh-wee. This is nice. And notice again, he says, by not going after young men, whether the young men were poor or rich. It tells us two basic things. Number one, Ruth herself had to be a relatively young woman. That is, as a young woman, qualified to be married to a young man. You got it? And this was not what she did. Number two, it also shows us by his statement, Boaz was an older man, and no doubt significantly older than Ruth. And so what he is seemingly shows not only his appreciation and gladness, but also a sense of surprise. He was surprised that he himself, being a much older gentleman, that Ruth would seek him out to be a husband and not try to get a younger man, somebody closer to her age. Again, we can see wisdom, can't we? What do you mean? The wisdom of Ruth, ladies, the wisdom in choosing a good husband. And so sometimes because we've already talked about the sense of providing security, because that was the primary motivation, right? Being able to take care of you. That was the primary move in all of this. But also and even as in the course of life, what happens as men walk through the season of life? Young men, sometimes you don't have a lot of resources. Sometimes you don't have a lot of money. But as you get older and older and older, it is the normative a person does increase. You make more. Your life is settled more. You gain more resources. So quite naturally, especially if Boaz didn't inherit a lot of things. The Bible doesn't get into the whole point of this. I'm just simply making a general comment about how life works. A man makes more, is worth more, and can do more. All right? So this is the state of Boaz. But the point is, he understands and he is shocked. Older man and a younger woman. Again, in choosing a good husband, because that was the overall point that I was trying to make. Sometimes it's not always the younger man that can be a good husband. Sometimes in finding a man a little bit older than yourself, a little bit maturer, a man who has experienced life and has gained from life's experience can be a good choice for a husband. Okay, but anyway, just another little nugget of wisdom that we can kind of infer from the text. So he continues on. Verse number 11, we've already read it. He says, the gesture that you have done, that is the laying at my feet this way. Don't fear. I get the point that you are trying to make. Notice, I will do for you whatever you ask. That's the point. And guess what he said? As Ruth, by her actions, were asking him, and let me say it in a general sense, will you marry me? His answer came immediately. Yes, I am willing to marry you. And then notice again, so beautiful, the remainder of the verse. For all my people in the city, everybody knows that you are a woman of excellence. Ki ashes chayil at. I like that. I had to do a little Hebrew, but everybody knows, again, speaking to the integrity of Ruth, the godly nature of Ruth, even in this activity, the humility of, you see the picture that is painting of Ruth, and this is known by everybody. Now, let me just step back, broaden this concept, because what is Naomi trying to do? What is all of this about? How to catch a good man. You need to be a woman of integrity. What is Ruth doing even right here? She is not sleeping with Boaz. Naomi did not counsel her, go and have sex with Boaz. Naomi, it was not this picture that we have about Ruth. It's not always about how tight her jeans were. The picture about Ruth was not about how her makeup and all and her nail. No, that was not the overall picture. The overall, what we see, integrity, godliness, righteousness, humility. This is the character of a good woman. Notice, what did Boaz say? Everybody knows how you are. Everybody knows about, watch this, y'all, your reputation. Everybody knows what? Your reputation. How you're a woman of integrity. Ladies, how do you catch a good man? By being a woman of integrity. You don't have to sell yourself short. You don't have to dress in an overly provocative way. You don't have to present yourself in an overly sexualized manner. You don't see that, do you? If you are, I am only talking to godly women. That's all I'm talking. I'm not talking about the women of the world. The women of the world can catch a man their kind of way, and they can catch any kind of a man. But the scripture here is teaching how to catch a good one, how to catch a godly one. It's not with overly sexualization of yourself. Don't sell yourself short, but be a godly woman who carries herself with such respectability and integrity to the point that she has a reputation. At the end of this verse, what did it say? Let me read it again. What did Boaz say? All my people in the city know that you are a woman of excellence. That's it. That's how you catch a good man, by being a good woman, a woman of excellence, your own self. All right, I've preached enough on that. 12. Now it is true, I am a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. Remain this night, and when morning comes, if he will redeem you, good. Let him redeem you. But if he does not wish to redeem you, then I will redeem you. As the Lord lives, lie down until morning. So Boaz continues talking to her. And now we begin to see also, remember we talked about catching what? A good man. We see that being emphasized again in the integrity and the honesty of Boaz. So he responds to Ruth, indeed, I am a kinsman-redeemer. I'm a close relative of you. Remember, the right of this remarriage is to the closest relative. So he says, I am clearly close in line. However, there is a man even closer than me. So it shows Boaz's knowledge of the family, and it also might show that Boaz has thought about this thing. I don't know, but I don't want to speculate. But what it does point out for us, here is the point, his honesty. What do I mean? In other words, he's not trying to just marry Ruth knowing he does not have the right. Why? He's not the closest one. The right goes first to the closest one. So Boaz is saying what? I'm close, but one is closer. That shows the honesty of him. So what does he do? He wants to do things in the right way. He wants to do things in the right way. So this once again highlights the fact of his integrity, that he is a good man. So how do you know that? Because he says, remain this night when the morning comes. So what? Again, when the morning comes, if he will redeem you. Let me say this point before I get it. It shows that Boaz is intent to act upon this thing right now, immediately, in the morning. But let's continue talking about his integrity. If he'll redeem you, good, let him redeem you. But if he does not redeem you, then I will redeem you. So it begins, so his integrity, to show that he is a good man, the right goes to the nearest relative. And if he chooses to exercise this right, then good. It's all right. It's fine with me. Of course, he'll abandon all hope. Let him exercise this right. Then he said, but once again, if he chooses not to exercise this right, if he doesn't want to marry you, Ruth, then I will redeem you. Again, showing how Boaz is saying, yeah, I want to marry you. But here's the beauty of it. As the Lord lives, he makes this a promise. He binds his word with an oath. as the Lord, as Yahweh lives. In other words, it shows his excitement and enthusiasm and his commitment and desire to marry Ruth. In other words, Ruth said, "Will you marry me?" in a very bold move. And he responds in a loud, extremely joyful way. "You doggone right, I'll marry you. But there's a man closer than me. Let's see if he wants to marry you first. Stay here, stay the night, and I'll let you know." Continuing. 14. So she lay at his feet until morning and rose before one could recognize another. And he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." Again, he said, "Give me the cloak that is on you and hold it." So she held it, and he measured 6 measures of barley and laid it on her. Then she went into the city. So what happened? So she stayed at his feet until the morning. And I like that too. There was no sexual interaction. Therefore, you can see the gesture of Ruth. And even what did Boaz say? "The whole city knows of your integrity. You are a woman of a good reputation." And she was not about to mar her reputation in order to get Boaz to marry her. She wasn't about to have sex with him or nothing else. If he can respond to the gesture within itself, then too bad. But anyway, but nevertheless, it all went very well. And she stayed at his feet until the morning, and notice, and she rose before one could recognize another. I like that too. Why? She rose early in the morning before a person, because people can see you moving about. But so if somebody did see Ruth, they wouldn't know that was Ruth. So who was that was leaving from the threshing floor of Boaz and his servants? And the answer would be, I don't know. It was somebody. I don't know. So she left very early. Something else I like. Here's the point that I'm trying to make. When we consider the overall gesture, it was a bold gesture by Ruth. It could be understood. It could be misinterpreted by other people. Something more nefarious, something of an immoral gesture that may have been, they don't know about her laying at his feet and all of that. As a matter of fact, they don't know what the devil was going on in that particular area where they were. The people don't know that. But you know how people are. People can often infer the wrong things when they see a man with a woman. And the first thing that goes through people's mind was some type of sexual interaction. Well, they must be courting, or they must have just did so and so and so. It shows wisdom. It shows the wisdom of both Boaz and Ruth. And also it teaches us a wisdom. Sometimes even when you have done nothing wrong. Now, notice in this picture, here's the question that I'm asking you. Even though Ruth's gesture, uncovering his feet and laying at his feet, was bold in that questioning, asking strong request of marriage, what bad thing, what sexual immoral thing did she do wrong? The answer is absolutely nothing. God himself is looking at it. God himself is speaking about it in the scripture. But sometimes you need to curtail your behavior. Sometimes you have to be mindful of what you say and what you do and how it's interpreted by other people. Why? Because the nature of people to interpret something is always from a bad lens, unless it's about them. If they're thinking about themselves, the way they're going to look at it is all good. But when they look at somebody else, when they look at you, somehow it got to be something bad. It has to be something nefarious. It has to be something sexual. So what is going on? We see again the integrity of Boaz. What is he trying to do? He is trying to protect Ruth's reputation. He doesn't want anybody to see her leaving him early in the morning or late at night, as sometimes we may call it, and begin to think that she was doing something that she had no business. He is protecting her. Speaking once again, Boaz is a good man. But before she leaves, also too, developing that further character, remember she has a cloak on. He says, hold out this cloak. And he empties into that cloak provision. So we see what? The generosity of Boaz. And we also see a gesture. Remember, he has already adamantly declared that he has a desire to marry her and is going to get on top of that immediately. But also we can see the continuation of providing. What did the chapter open up as? Naomi says, I need to find security for you. Or even, next verse, I need to find someone, Boaz, who will provide. What is Boaz indicating? By this gesture, telling her to take out your mantle. Actually, that's the idea, out of cloak, out of garment. And he poured 6 measures, which was a significant amount. It would have been hard for Ruth to carry all that much generosity and provision. But the point is, I am willing to provide for you. And because of the overly provision, how much he gave. You wait till we get to the end of that. Remember this point, how much he gave. I'll talk about that in the passage of the scripture. All right. He gave it to her, sent her home. So he's going to marry her. He's willing to provide for her. And even he will continue. Even right now, he's providing for her. So let's finish it. Wrap it up. 16. When she came to her mother-in-law, she said, how did it go, my daughter? And she told her all that the man had done for her. She said, look, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said, here's the key. Do not go to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Then she said, wait, my daughter, until you know how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest until he has settled it today. I like that part, that Naomi. It kind of makes me a little hot under the shoulders. I'll tell you what. Listen. What? So Ruth goes back home to her mother-in-law. Of course, she does like she did the first time. She tells her what happened with respect to the little plan that Naomi set in motion and how Boaz responded to that gesture. And she told her. And so after telling her everything that had happened, she also showed her, remember the cloak that he put in the 6 barleys, right? And I told you the amount that he gave to Ruth was ample. It would have been difficult for her trying to carry all of that. Not only a suggestion of generosity, but also we see here in verse number 17, notice the additional words. This lets us know also what Boaz was saying to her in the amount. Do not go to your mother-in-law empty-handed. So not only was he and did he provide for Ruth with the barley, but also he was providing for her mother-in-law. So what is the point? He was saying to Ruth in that whole issue, remember, we're talking about marriage here, right? Performing the role of the Gaal, the Kinsman-Redeemer, the one who marries the wife of the dead brother. Not only am I willing to provide and take care of you, but I am also willing to provide and take care of your mother-in-law. Because we got to go back all the way to the beginning of the story as we have it. Once Naomi, chapter 2, once Naomi and Ruth have arrived back in Bethlehem, and she sends Ruth out, and Ruth is providing, Ruth is working for the both of them. Boaz knows this. He has acquired this information, and he responds to Ruth in acts of kindness and generosity. And so now that Ruth has come to Boaz in requesting, can I say it our way, his hand in marriage, requesting that he perform the role of the Kinsman-Redeemer, he understands that not only would Ruth desire provisions for herself, she also wants Boaz to take care of her mother-in-law too. The point is, the whole package. If you're going to take me, you got to take your mother-in-law. So the point of it is, Boaz was saying, I take the whole package. Even ladies, I don't want to get much into this, but let me make a practical application. So let me build on this because, and even though, and what I mean by build upon it is from the principle of Boaz understanding to take Ruth is also to take Naomi. That's what I mean. Naomi is a part of the package. She is a part of a responsibility that Ruth has. You know, sometimes when we're married or we're seeking somebody to marry, and I speak ladies because this is basically what the book of Ruth is all about. Two ladies and the wisdom, choosing out a good man for yourself. Sometimes, ladies, there may be children involved. You have one or more children, and you want a husband or whatever, and you want to choose a good man for your husband. The wisdom is, how will that man be with your children? And this is the practical point that I'm trying to draw out of this text. If you're going to find a good husband, if you're going to find a good man for yourself, and if you have children and other responsibilities of that nature, you see what I'm saying? You need to make sure that this man is willing to assume the responsibility. If he will take you and yours as his own and assume that role in the overall sense, that's a good choice for a husband. All right? And that's all I'll say about that. And so then, verse number 18. Remember when I was telling you guys I kind of get a little hot? Let me tell you the reason why. That calculative nature of women. What do we see? Notice the mother-in-law, after she heard everything, because the whole point was catching. They were trying to catch that man. They ensnared him. She basically said to Ruth, we got him. We got him. Those women, and let me say it this way, they be calculating on us. Wait, my daughter, until you know how the matter turns out. Notice, she understands by everything that Ruth has said to her about what took place between herself and Boaz at the threshing floor, and that eagerness, she understands the eagerness of Boaz to marry Ruth. Because notice, for the man will not rest. He will not rest until he has settled it today. That means she knew not only did Ruth catch him, she got him good. And women, how the guy say, women be playing and women be planning. All right, I'm done. Thank you so much. You know what? I'm not going to do much of a review of chapter 3 with the sense simply to say, basically the whole idea was the time for the barley harvest is over with, when Ruth would have been going out day by day and earning work, money by the wheat and stuff like that. And she could provide for herself and Naomi. But as that season went by, then the question came into the mind of Naomi, what do I need to do now? Because we need to continue to survive. And so she's thinking not just simply of herself, but even more so of her precious daughter-in-law, Ruth. And she says, daughter, baby, I need to provide for you. You've been so good. I need to do something to help you because you need to keep on living. And I tell you what, she says to her, the closest relative we got is Boaz, this guy you've been working for. You know he has a little money. Why don't you try to get him to perform the role of the Kinsman-Redeemer? And as a man who has wealth, he can provide for you. So you go to him at the threshing floor where he is, and you do this thing. You uncover you wait till he eat and is drinking and is laying down for the night, and go and uncover him and lay at his feet, and then cover yourself back with his covering, so that when he wakes up in the middle of the night, he'll see this bold gesture of yours and he'll know exactly what you are requesting him to do. And so Ruth complied and she did that. And so in doing all of the things that her mother-in-law said, she waited until he ate and drank and went to sleep and laid at his feet. In the middle of the night, Boaz stirred and he found Ruth, and he was startled, and he discovered who she was. But at the same time, he knew the bold gesture of what she was asking him to do. And Ruth, I love the way she said it. She said, I am your maid servant, so you need to cover your maid servant. Just like you covering me now with the covering of your feet, cover me in my life. And so he knew that. Excitedly, joyfully, Boaz responded with a yes in marriage, and he was appreciative that she didn't go after a young man and that she should wait. And he is going to determine whether or not he can do this thing. Why? Because he was her redeemer. He was a close relative, but there was still one closer than him. And so the option to marry Ruth had to go to him first. This again highlighting his integrity, that he was a good man. And so after that, the morning came, he gave her ample provisions for her, Ruth, and her mother-in-law, and sent her quietly away and instructed his servants, Boaz's servants, don't let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. He instructed his servants, protecting Ruth's reputation and her integrity, sent her away to her mother-in-law. Ruth goes to her mother-in-law, tells her everything that had been taking place, and Naomi responds, basically, you got him. He's going to marry you. Just wait, because he ain't going to rest until he determines whether or not he can marry you or not. All right. Thanks so much for joining me, guys. Join me next time as we go into chapter 4, the last chapter of the book of Ruth, and we'll see Boaz as he goes through procedurally what's involved in trying to attain Ruth's hand at marriage. And finally, we'll see the happy ending that we have in the marriage of Boaz to Ruth and the child that comes out of this marriage. And even the whole purpose of the book, the lineage of David that comes forward from this marriage of Ruth the Moabitess and Boaz. All right. Thanks, guys. See you next time.